Most of the provisions in the Constitution of 1998 included a lot of liberal structural adjustments on it, and they promoted a lot of private sector and diminishing of the power of the state in order to implement public policy. And given the fact that those elements were included in the 1998 Constitution, in 2008, when the Constituent Assembly was called, actually there were not one of the reasons why the people protested against the Constitution, and why some of the reasons why the political climate in Ecuador was so unstable and there was no trust in institutions in Ecuador, was always linked to the fact that those were the result of the structural adjustment policies. And it was just, I think that most of the Constitution, the 2008 Constitution, is just a repeal and a reaction towards all those liberal policies that didn't work. They promised a lot of things, but in the end they just benefited a few people. That was the general perception, and that there wasn't a lot of significant changes in bettering the conditions of the population in Ecuador. And besides that, there was also this big impression that the state had a diminished capacity in order to respond to the people's needs, and to respond especially with the fact of the need that they needed to redistribute income in a better way. That wasn't very evident, and that's one of the reasons why I think the option that the Ecuadorian state adopted, instead of abandoning a more liberal on the economic perspective way, and adopting a more, I will say, more socialistic, but I will say, instead of calling, as the government called themselves, the socialism of the 21st century, I think they're more identified with neo-Keynesian policies. I think there's more of Keynesianism in the nature of the constitution in Ecuador. I think that's one of the reasons of the biggest shift in change, because there was all this resentment of the lack of results and of the lack of better conditions for the population that led to the fact of abandoning that model, that economic model. I think that one of the things why this model was abandoned was because of the fact that it was never fully applied. But it also contains a very different perspective on how relations between the people and the market are seen. And I think the reason of maybe benefiting more the market instead of the people was one of the reasons why it didn't work. As we just heard before in one of the comments of one of the practitioners who was in the meeting, I think it's very important the fact that we should not constitutionalize, for example, Washington consensus approaches or any consensus, because if you also take, choose to implement a lot of socialist or communist or whatever political ideology institutions you're looking for in the economy, that will create you a constraint who will be very difficult to amend after that. So I think that most of it should have to be with the fact that it all depends on what do you want for your country and what is the political view of the society of your country. You want to build a more stable and maybe a more solidary system which takes into account equality issues between the people. You want to better the income distribution. You want to make more transparent, for example, the use of the income of natural resources. I think those are the issues that need to be looked at into. And that's maybe that's one of the I don't think I'm in position to give advice to those countries, but I will say that there are some important things that you need to look into, and those are the things that you need to take into consideration. The fact that you don't have to opt out or opt in a specific model, but you need to ask your questions specifically for the country and see what is the history of that. If the history proves that, if the history tells you that you had reached good results by applying any policy, that will say that maybe that's a way that how it works in your country. Maybe it will work in yours, but not in other country. But there are like basic, specific questions that you need to ask yourself about how the economy and the development of your country. You want what do you want? What do people want? How they want to develop? And that's the reason why you should maybe look into that instead of choosing a path of development or economic policies. As As I mentioned before, I think that one of the key elements in order to make the constitution a reality depends a lot on how much political will the political constituency, not only from the government but also from the legislator and all the other powers of the country, they put into it. I mean, it all depends on that and how much they are committed to the changes. And I think that in Ecuador we have a very interesting process where most of the people is very involved and is trying to protect the constitution which they voted for. And they are in a way pushing all the politicians and all the constituents and the government and the legislator in order to implement those things. And they are, I think that there's much more involvement in what is going on and how it is developing. And that is the reason why I think that so far in those 2 and a little bit more of years that the Constitution is enacted, I think that they have been doing a good job trying to implement it, but it also, I think, that has a lot to do with the fact that the people have much more sense of what they have to look for, and that they have a constitution that they can start using. And I think that that's one of the things that will be crucial in Ecuador. The constitution will be implemented just in the measure of how the people know how to use it and how we use all those tools that the same constitution has in order to enforce all the elected people and the politicians to implement it. One of the reasons why the importance of the concept of the nature's rights is the fact that you need to look at it as not as a legal change, not as a legal document or a legal set of provisions, but more in a political way on how the state wants to develop itself. And it tries to propose a new relationship between the inhabitants and the nature, and trying to make them understand the fact that they are not something separated from the environment, that they are part of it and they are part of the same cycle. And any kind of development that the state wants to go or encourage has to take into consideration that you need to be respectful, or not only respectful, but you need to understand the fact that you are part of that system and that anything you will do will come back to you in some other way. Issues like the global climate change and global warming and stuff like that are becoming more and more important, and I think that the government right now, and not only the government but the state itself, has a very big challenge in order to try to harmonize on how do you rule a country, how do you provide for all the needs of the country, how do you guarantee all those rights that are in the constitution and that demand a lot of resources. And given the fact that you rely on those natural resources in order to have an income, and how are you gonna try to settle for an agreement in order to see, okay, am I continuing exploiting the natural resources in order to get money to guarantee people's rights? But what happens if that exploitation of resources is depleting the nature and creating environmental problems in the long run? So that's one of the things that I think that the government, especially because they are the ones who implement the public policy and they have like the biggest burden on guaranteeing rights, on how are they going to make it? And what are the things that they will start changing their mind, saying, you know, okay, we should, and there's like the national planning who says that they should abandon this extractive economy model towards another one who will start producing more services and more technology. But in order to make that change, you need resources as well. So there has to be some sort of strategy in order to start depending less and less from natural resources extraction and starting to build other spaces in order to create a new type of economy. So I think there's the big challenge for Ecuador in order to try to understand that you need to change your point of view and that you need to respect of nature's rights in a way that you are part of it, and that everything that you will do will come back to you in some other way, maybe not a good way, but a harmless way, given all the environmental disasters that we've seen lately.